my pleasure to welcome you today to Natalie Burack's senior honors presentation that I had the pleasure of working with Natalie over this past year on her project. Let me say a few things to you about Natalie, some of her accomplishments. She's just about to graduate in how many days now, with a major in history and a minor in pre-law. She has certainly made the most of her time here at Messiah College and elsewhere, made the most of her college years, college education. She's studied at Oxford University through the Scholar Semester Program. She's a Boyer Scholar, a member of the Honors Program here at Messiah College, also a member of Phi Alpha Theta, the National History Honor Society. She's been very active in internships and in various volunteer and service activities. She's interned for the Pennsylvania House of Representatives Archives, actually doing that this semester. The summer of 2012, interned for a circuit court judge in Maryland. She's been a Smith Scholar intern, as well as a research assistant in the history department, and also is one of the recipients of a really very important grant, the Friends of Murray Library Annual Research Grant. She won that this past year to do research at the Beinecke Library in Yale, and we'll all be getting to hear of Natalie's research. Now let me say too a few words about the project itself. One of the things that strikes me as I think back on my year working with Natalie is it's a bit of this was really an unusual project in some ways. And I think I can speak for all of my colleagues in saying that most of the time the way it works out, sometimes it's sort of deliberate, sometimes it's just accidental, but that students' projects are somewhere in the ballpark of where their professor they're working with is working. Well, Natalie comes to me a year ago, and I think this sort of illustrates, I think, some of Natalie's strengths and ability. She comes to me with this idea that, I'll be honest, maybe shouldn't have this on tape here, I was totally ignorant of. I didn't know Poppy Cannon from anybody before. But it's just like Natalie, I think, to come up with this idea. I was struck throughout my time working with Natalie that she's independent in a good way. She knows her own mind. She knows what she's interested in. She set about coming up with this project, and she figured out a way to accomplish it. And very curious. Even she hadn't done a whole lot of work on Poppy Cannon, on cuisine, on all of the different worlds and issues that are related to this that we'll hear about. But she set her course towards this. And in the end, I remember her sort of saying in so many words that she thought that Poppy Cannon was both interesting and important, that there was a really important story here. She convinced me early on that this was indeed so, and I'm quite confident she's going to convince you about this as well today. That she should be known. She should be known arguably as much as very famous, well-known figures like Julia Child, her near contemporary. Julia Child, famous celebrity chef of the 1950s and 60s, has many books, and maybe some of us can attest, even has her own movie. And poor Poppy Cannon, nothing so far. Natalie publishes her book. So a most interesting and a most important project as well, that she did really wonderfully over the course of this past year. In her second dictionary reading in women's history, this is a significant field that Natalie tackled and really read widely in Americans' women's history. Wrote a very nice, thorough, thoughtful literature review on this. And then more recently, and this is what we're going to hear about today, the results of her deep primary source research, especially in Poppy Cannon's papers that are held at the Beinecke Library. It is, I hope and trust you'll agree with me, a fascinating story and a really important story. The portion that she's going to share with us this afternoon is entitled The Can Opener Gourmet, Poppy Cannon and American Culture in the 1950s. Please join me in welcoming that.
direction and guidance you could, even though this is a subject I knew the rest really knew about going into it. So thank you for having an open mind about that. I'd also like to thank my advisor, Dr. Thea, and the rest of the history department for my past 4 years here and just inspiring me with their love of history and giving me the skills that I needed to do this project. I also want to personally thank Janet Vogel, Messiah alum and here who has talked with me about my topic as it kind of intersects with interests of hers, and read through drafts of my papers, let me borrow her books, and just it's nice to talk to someone who is excited about the subject. I also want to give a big thanks to the Friends of Murray Library for the grant that they gave me that allowed me to do crucial research at the Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library at Yale University. I was able to look at Poppy Cannon's letters and a collection of papers and just see how really her personal life intersected with her career, and that was really important for me to be able to do that. And lastly, I would like to thank my fiance Brian for his support, and specifically for driving me to Yale. And I'm sure all the other drivers on the road thank you as well. So now I just want to introduce my project and how I kind of chose my topic. I've always been interested in food. Like, I love to eat food. I'm sure many of you do as well. And my freshman year here, I took a nutrition class thinking that my love of food could translate into a major. But I soon realized that thinking so much about nutrition kind of took away from my enjoyment of baked goods and snacks and things like that. So that wasn't going to work out. And then my senior year, in a hectic few weeks before having to turn in my thesis proposal, I was trying to think of a topic. I wanted to do something new that I hadn't studied before. And I thought, hey, this is a great time to kind of like pursue my passion for food in a historical way. And I think that's something interesting that I could share now in my thesis presentation. So sitting on the floor of Murray Library last probably April, I was going through an encyclopedia of important culinary figures, and I came across a short bio on a mid-20th century food writer named Poppy Cannon, a woman I had never heard of before. But I thought this was surprising since she had written many books, she had her own TV show. She obviously was very popular in that time, and I thought, wow, this was only, less than, or a little more than 50 years ago, but her name is virtually unknown. So this mystery, combined with her interesting post-war historical context, led me to declare her my subject of study. But just as I had never heard of her before, so had not many others. Of the few articles and references that I did find about her, most all are based off the same single chapter in a book written by Laura Shapiro called Something from the Oven. And most, if they knew anything about her, only knew her a shallow understanding of what she did, both in her life and in her cooking. In The Atlantic, Anne Hodgman wrote that Poppy Cannon might have been created to embody the conflict between quality first and convenience first cooking. James Beard, another gourmet chef, couldn't stand her work, and it's easy to see why. Cannon loved crappy convenience foods. So you can see here they already are kind of setting up this dichotomy between good cooking, classic cooking, and convenience foods. And they're saying, clearly, Poppy Cannon, this is all she is. She's one note. She loves these crappy foods. End of story. In another article written by Virginia Heffernan in the New York Times, she was talking about James Beard and Poppy Cannon and said, I must be missing something. But why is James Beard the hero between them? Because she used an electric egg beater and he didn't? Again, I thought this was a good question. Is that really the reason why? Is that her crime, why she's lost to history? And last, my favorite response was by a blogger known as the Cookbook Man. And he wrote an article titled, Who the Heck is Poppy Cannon Anyway? And as I started out, this is kind of what I was asking myself as well. But now I have the answer, and I'm going to share that with all of you. To answer this question, I turned to the historic record. I looked at articles from the magazines that she wrote for as food editor that I got from the Pennsylvania State Library. I read her cookbooks, her biography of her late husband, and most importantly, the collection of her papers and letters at the Beinecke Library. This is me in front of the library, and this is a scan of one of her letters that she wrote to her late husband in the 1940s. Like I said, these really let me see kind of a behind-the-scenes look at her and have a deeper analysis than what I'd seen in the very narrow secondary sources available. So to give a little background, most of this is taken from her resume. She was born in 1905 and emigrated with her family from South Africa at a young age, and they settled in Pennsylvania. In 1927, she graduated from Vassar on a scholarship, and she immediately got married to her first husband, and she intended on becoming a writer. But first, they moved to New York City, and she began working as an advertising and food consultant for a company called Maxon Incorporated. And she worked on accounts for big companies like Heinz Ketchup, General Foods, and other frozen food manufacturers. For the rest of her life, she continued to be connected with this industry and used her knowledge of convenience foods and new products and technology in her cooking and writing. Beginning in the 1930s, she started writing in women's magazines about food and became the food editor. She wrote for, later, House Beautiful, Ladies' Home Journal, and several other magazines. She also authored or co-authored 11 cookbooks, many of which went through several reprints and she appeared on several television shows and radio shows throughout the 1950s. And you can see here from some of the titles of her cookbooks where her interests kind of lie. And titles like the Can Opener Cookbook and the Fast Gourmet and the Frozen Foods Cookbook. She's really trying to marry these ideas of convenience and availability with gourmet techniques and kind of high-class living. Her social and her personal life also affected her career. Her third husband was named Claude Philippe, and he was a French gourmet chef at the elite New York City and Waldorf Astoria Hotel. And through his culinary circles, she really got involved in being a gourmet traveler, traveling to France and Italy, trying all the best wines, all the best French cuisine. And she really developed an appreciation for gourmet living, seeing how food can affect many areas of life. So there's a blend of both the industry side that she had in her early career and the gourmet, which she received through her personal life and her background. So you can see maybe why in the same decade she wrote something called the Can Opener Cookbook, but then in Aromas and Flavors of the Past and Present, she worked with Alice Toklas, who was a roommate of Gertrude Stein, and a well-known gourmet French cook who really represented high culture French living. But also when Poppy Cannon was trying to convince Alice Toklas of the benefits of convenience food and new technology, she sent Toklas a blender in the mail. And Toklas was kind of hesitant at first to use this, but after she did, she wrote Cannon a rejoicing letter saying that the blender was a third untiring arm, and she said it made a great centerpiece for her table. But it was husband number 4 that made the biggest impact on Poppy Cannon's life. Yes, choose this story. Walter White, the executive secretary of the NAACP, met Poppy Cannon in the 1930s at a party, and soon after they began an affair. They were both married at the time, but the prejudices, because Walter, though he had fair skin, was technically still a Negro, and the social pressures of their life seemed to make them think that they didn't really have a chance of going anywhere with this relationship. So they kind of let it fall to the wayside. But then in the late 1940s, their paths crossed again, and they both felt that their love was too great to keep a secret any longer, and they started the affair up again. And reading their letters back and forth at this time, you can see all the pressure they have. They want to be together, and they are very genuine in their love, but they're thinking about the effects on their kids, the effects on their careers and their relationships, and especially we're afraid of what the response would be politically for this interracial couple. But in 1949, they decided to go for it, and they both divorced their spouses and were married. Poppy Cannon became involved in Walter's political and diplomatic work, adding another dimension to her already busy life. One of the interesting jobs that she had through her career was public relations consultant for the Republic of Haiti. And you can see her here. The caption's a little messed up, but She's with the president of Haiti and his wife. And the top photo is her husband and her at a Ebony photo shoot. It was a magazine, and it was shortly after they were married, they agreed to do a story about it, interracial relationships. And then in the bottom over there, you can see her publicizing in New York her husband's book, How Far the Promised Land. This was after his death. So you can see there's this extremely public and career-oriented side of Poppy Cannon, but we also have to remember that she had a personal family life as well. Like many married women with children in the 1950s, Cannon had a job outside of the home. She was both a working woman and a mother to 3 children. In fact, 2 out of 5 women during the 1950s had school-age children, yet they were still working outside the home. So Poppy Cannon could relate to a wide array of women. But even though we can see how interesting and dynamic her life was, somehow Poppy Cannon has been all but forgotten by historians and scholars and even foodies who've instead focused on her later contemporary Julia Child. This is surprising considering the vast audiences that Cannon reached through her articles and programs and books. But the answer to this mystery seems to lie in her own paradoxical approach to both life and cooking. She did not fit neatly into any category, whether it be food or feminism. And unlike Child, she was not a pure gourmet. Rather, she targeted an audience of working middle-class women who also wanted to enjoy good food and culture. And Cannon told them that they could have both. She also failed to represent the conformist women's magazine stereotype of the 1950s. She was not the poster child of materialist domesticity, despite the efforts of other authors to present her as such by focusing solely on her works like the Can Opener Cookbook and not looking deeper into her life. Yet she didn't condemn the industry either, or the culture of domesticity, as did her other contemporary, Betty Friedan. Cannon's middle ground position makes her a difficult subject of study, yet a completely worthwhile and intriguing one. Her life, and specifically her style of cooking, reveals some of the cultural tensions present in the 1950s. Tensions which Cannon not only understood, but also attempted to resolve with her unique approach to cooking, which spoke to the needs of middle-class America. What I found through my project is that the culture and the cuisine in the 1950s was not one that was one note or conformist, but rather this was a time of change and challenge and transition. And I think it is this picture of the 1950s that Poppy Cannon best represents. Here I have a number of images that are kind of like these nostalgic images that we think of like quintessential 1950s homemaker. And these are used to represent middle-class white America. And it's easy to think that this is really all that the 1950s has to tell about this angle. But even within this subsector of women living at home, middle-class women, there's points of growth and diversity and tension. I found that Poppy Cannon situated herself between 2 main areas that were tightly knit together: the transitions and changes in the culinary world and in the world of domesticity and women. First, there are the issues and problems faced by the wives and mothers who are full-time housewives, struggling with a sense of purposelessness, and also the contrasting burden felt by the growing number of women who are also working outside of the home, and then thus they found little energy to fulfill the duties that society was telling them was their moral obligation to fill. It is tempting to dismiss any type of response or acknowledgement of these issues in the 1950s and look solely at the contributions of Betty Friedan, who released her landmark study, The Feminine Mystique, in 1961, and critiqued the prison-like attributes of being a housewife. But to look only at Betty Friedan and say, okay, here's the story, here's the first one on the scene to see a problem here, the problem with no name, as she put it. There are actually women working even within the domestic industry who were commenting on this issue and tension that women were facing. In 1958, Cannon wrote, "These women in America who are being forced willy-nilly into what might be the arid isolation of housework and child raising, For it is not true that our modern mechanical appliances free women from domestic responsibilities. They help to make her more efficient, but at the same time, they load upon her more responsibilities rather than fewer. They make it possible for her to do more and more, but more and more is being required of her. So Cannon knew the troubles that women were facing and that they're feeling overworked or perhaps underappreciated. But instead of turning her back on cooking and domesticity, Cannon encouraged women and even men to take a new look at their lives and find the redeeming points of cooking. She wrote in one cookbook, "At this moment of history, this is a matter of considerable significance, since millions of well-educated persons, men and women, are faced especially in the United States with the need to do chores that can be dull and depressing, or tremendously stimulating, depending on the point of view." I think this was a big problem because as more people were able to attend college, specifically through the GI Bill, or women having more opportunities to get an education, and then being forced back into some place that wasn't taking advantage of their learning, she found that a state of mind and really looking at these issues in new ways was going to be the difference between depression and stimulation. Secondly, Cannon was writing and cooking and eating during a time of culinary transition as well. It's easy to look at the 1950s and think of pictures like these of ghastly canned casseroles and jello salads, and then turn in awe and gratitude to Julia Child for bringing us real food. And Julia Child, like Friedan, led a revolution in the 1960s, only hers was a culinary revolution based on classic French cooking. Julia Child has received loads of attention, as Dr. LeGrand said, starting with her popular film, Julie and Julia, which was released in 2009. In this movie, one of the characters, Julie Powell, who was a Julia Child fanatic, remarks that before Julia Child, there was only frozen food, can openers, and marshmallows. And she just left it at that. And so thinking of that, that's what you might think that Poppy Cannon was only frozen food, can openers, and marshmallows. But there's a problem with this outlook on her life and the cuisine of the 1950s in general. It's a shame to overlook the contributions that Poppy Cannon made to the culinary world. Instead of embodying all that is wrong with 1950s cuisine, Poppy tried to take some of the benefits of industry and technology and reconcile these with the lifestyle of a gourmet, what she called being a modern epicure. Barring from her many experiences abroad, her travel, and her vast culinary research, Cannon acted as a translator, as she called herself, between making cooking fine food accessible and attainable for the average American middle-class cook. Instead of conforming to the other popular trend among ladies' magazines, which was to look at food only as a source of nutrition, and they based it solely on processed foods, Cannon was instead influenced by the gourmands like her husband Philippe and others such as James Beard and Alice Toklas, who instead appreciated food for the sensory experience and the delight of sheer taste. She distinguished herself between these other 1950s cooks and said, "Gone are the days when anything quick was considered a triumph, and concoctions of tuna fish, cream of mushroom soup, and potato chips flourished among the hurry-up menus. Now we are becoming classicists and are analyzing the complicated, work-consuming recipes of olden days." In this way, I think that Julia Child kind of paved the way for, Poppy Cannon paved the way for Julia Child's food revolution, because she helped to develop this sense of an appreciation for a gourmet lifestyle, specifically in Middle America. So as you can see, Cannon dealt with two tensions or issues of the post-war 1950s culture: the tensions between women and work in the home, and the culinary struggles between gourmets and the convenience food-based nutritionists. She dealt with them both on personal and professional levels. This slide shows an excerpt from a letter from a doctor friend of hers reading, "Dear Poppy, congratulations on your recent appointment as public relations consultant of the Republic of Haiti. How can you manage your many activities and yet make good biscuits for Walter?" I thought this letter showed well, like, how she could be so involved, have all these activities inside the home, or outside the home, yet she still had this other side of her identity, which was being a wife and a mother, and often this identity was directly linked to making good food. So she had to come up with a solution to balance these two things and communicate that to women. However, her solution to both of these problems differed greatly from Child's and for Dan's. Though, like both the other women, her end goal was to enhance the joy in the lives of American women. So for the rest of my presentation, I'm going to explain her solutions through her cooking philosophy and its implications. First, she clearly recognized what roadblocks were preventing women from cooking or from enjoying the process of cooking. For many women, they were busy. They had children that they had to take care of. They had activities and were involved in their community, or they were working outside the home and still had to be the main homemaker when they got home from work. So for them, a lack of time and energy to make a good meal was a roadblock. Maybe people who did have time didn't have the access to the gourmet ingredients, or they didn't have the resources to buy these ingredients. For others, they were maybe young brides who didn't have any kind of training in the kitchen and they had no confidence in trying new things. And for many women, inspiration was the problem. They were working day in and day out with bland, mass-produced food, and they weren't excited or stimulated by the things that they were doing in the kitchen, especially if they were leaving behind careers and educations in pursuit of wife and motherhood. Yet, for all these women and all these deterrents, Poppy had a solution. In the intro of the book she co-authored with Alice Toklas, she wrote, "Through the exercise of intellect, by paying more rather than less attention to domesticity, we can make it more interesting and rewarding. Exquisite and thoughtful cooking in the Alice Toklas tradition will not only exercise and also appeal to the mind. What is more, it lifts the heart and stimulates the spirit." She promised that if you think deeply about these issues, you use your mind, you add some imagination, cooking can be not only rewarding to your stomach, but also to your soul. She saw food as a medium to express intellect and artistry and culture. But what about the limitations that the women were facing that I said? Her solution to these roadblocks were tied up in the potential and the hope of modern technology and convenience food, subjects which she, of course, knew a lot about because of her earlier career. For Cannon, these convenience foods represented an open sesame to wealth and freedom, as she wrote in one of her articles. In an early Mademoiselle article, she wrote about a new product saying, "Went up a tree for a quick dessert, you can wrestle a lemon pie in a jiff. Haven't you heard of the new wonder stuff called Clever Nook?" And later, next to an onion soup recipe of Alice Toklas's, she wrote, "Consider this said in a whisper. You can use Miss Toklas' ideas, even though you resort to canned or packaged dehydrated onion soup." So she's always looking for a shortcut, some way that allowed women to make good food, but in a way that fit their lifestyle, without compromising the quality of the food. And also in another early article, she wrote, "Granted, you haven't the time or the space, or even the mood to dream up an angel food cake. Nevertheless, you can serve food, good food too. It's all out of tins, but with verve, my dear, with dash." And I think this is really what sets her apart. She's taking these foods, but making them her own. She's adding her flair, as you could call it, and adding the spices, adding the extra fresh ingredients that kind of elevate the food to the next level. But she had to fight to convince others of the benefits of this approach. Recalling Alice Toklas's initial reaction to her method, Poppy snarkily wrote, "Between speed and ease and excellence there could be, Alice felt, no possible connection. All processed or prepared foods, canned, packaged, or, horror of horrors, frozen, was regarded not only with suspicion but disdain." But just as I said, she partially converted Alice Toklas, she convinced her readers as well that her approach was aimed at redeeming items like canned food and using them in new and appetizing ways. She wrote in her bride's cookbook, "At one time a badge of shame, hallmark of the lazy lady and the careless wife, today the can opener is fast becoming a magic wand, especially in the hands of those brave young women, 9 million of them, who are engaged in frying as well as bringing home the bacon." She wasn't trying to limit women to the home, but she wasn't trying to limit them in other ways as well. She was showing them how they could enjoy the domestic activities in a way that fit both their lifestyle and their one sense of culture. In an article entitled "Dear Food Industry, I Love You," you can see how tied she was to this industry. She saw many benefits to convenience food. It cut out the prep work, the stuff about cooking that wasn't fun or was too time consuming. For women who weren't comfortable with cooking, packaged mixes had easy steps that provided consistent results and gave them confidence in the kitchen. Also, the availability of foods in any season due to cans and freezers opened up the realm of many dishes that would have been impossible to make in earlier times. But she also had critiques for the industry. She saw a need for more personalization instead of mass-produced advice and products for the average consumer. She wrote, "Helping hands are not by any means our only lack. What we need even more is personalized advice. All of it now is geared for everyone, and none of it is personal. The impersonal supermarket can give no thought to an individual dilemma." This point resonated with her readers who were becoming sick of the bland, standardized food that they're being served by the industry and wanted a taste of high-class cooking instead that also fit their budget. She also critiqued specifics of convenience food, saying, "All those herb blends, for instance, I'm tired of the sameness." And later she asked, "Could you be more sparing with the salt?" She wanted to have the freedom to make these ingredients and these canned foods her own, and was picky about the brands and the types of products that she used. So she knew that there was more to cooking than simply dumping a can of soup into a bowl and calling it dinner. She wrote, "No matter how carefully ingredients are measured, they must be combined with magic, imagination, and inspiration in order to achieve the perfect blend of flavor." She saw her branch of cooking as new and improved, a culinary renaissance sweeping America. And in a House Beautiful article she wrote, "In the food field, we have brought mass production, mass distribution, and mass consumption to the highest level in the history of man. But what is most dazzling is the way in which mass has taken on class. We are rapidly becoming a nation of food connoisseurs. Since more and more of the mindless work of cooking is done industrially, leaving the interesting and creative part for the cook in the home, it is developing a new kind of cook, the talented amateur." So she's correctly identifying everything in this time, this mass culture, this huge middle-class America was rising up, but people were starting to see the problems with this. She also saw the problems, but also the benefits. She's saying, okay, here's a good thing. They're taking out the drudgery of cooking, and now we can enjoy cooking for what it's meant to be. We can see these little tastes, these little touches, and how they can elevate what the industry is giving us. Part of this culinary renaissance was tied to attention to food quality and cooking intellectually, as she put it. In her bride's cookbook, she wrote, "Don't check your brains at the kitchen door. The kind of thinking that gets you a raise or an A in English or economics will stand you in very good stead when you cook. Taste your food analytically." By telling women that domesticity didn't equate with brainlessness, Poppy Cannon was encouraging women to rethink about the walls between the public and the private sphere. She was saying they're more fluid than you think, and thinking and analysis can coexist with what was previously considered a simple wifely chore. She wanted women to think about what they were eating and why they were eating it. She wrote, "Unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, not many women in the modern world are permitted the luxury of merely contemplating or enjoying good food without knowledge of how it is done. Not only in eating, but also in cooking, the mind plays an important role." A lot of her articles and books were aimed at teaching women how to research and analyze the ingredients, and especially certain brands of food that they could use in cooking. She told them to look around, search, test, research, and find what ingredients, what dishes are the best to use. She wanted them to know what differentiated poor, can-based cooking from the cooking of a modern epicure. She wrote, "It is no longer considered chic, charming, or intellectual to be ignorant in the kitchen. To the rescue comes the manufacture of so-called ready-to-serve foods. Actually, at least in gourmet terms, they're not quite ready to serve. but they do provide the basis for any number of prideful, even complicated specialties. So taste, ponder, and perhaps then add the little connoisseur touches that make the big difference. For those who aspire to be part of a higher society and to get away from this mass culture, they found an answer in canon on how to be grand eaters as well as cooks. On a matter related to cooking with the mind, Cannon was a huge observer and advocate of how food is innately tied with culture. The title of this slide also comes from a title of one of her House Beautiful articles, in which she shows how eating and cooking allow a person to experience a culture and a people in a way that no other activity does. In letters from all of her travels, the thing that stands out the most is her meals that she eats there and the different kinds of food and cuisine that she comes in contact with. For both the affluent women who could afford to go abroad and taste for themselves, and to lower middle class housewives who may have just been happy to take a trip to the grocery store, she told them that they could taste their way around the globe by cooking food with an exotic taste. She also saw food as an historical artifact, saying we can be connected with the past and our ancestors by cooking and eating the way they did, and how recipes are handed down from one generation to another. And I thought this was distinct in how she put so much emphasis on this, as like now we kind of take for granted the study of food and foodways, but she was really, I think, on the brink of this kind of understanding. In another interesting product, she showcases how food also expresses ethnicity. In the 1940s, she traveled to the South, interviewing and eating with African Americans and learning their stories and history through their cuisine. This was a daring and a dangerous task for a white woman in that time. And I found a draft of this cookbook, which was never published, entitled The Black Magic Cookbook, where she put stories of certain African American just chefs or regular people next to the food that they made. Lastly, she tied food with poetry and literature. In her bride's cookbook, she interspersed the recipes with her own love poems that she wrote, making a new kind of culinary literature. In House Beautiful, she offered a list of our favorite 50 books about food, where she divided cookbooks into different genres, suggesting which ones are good for nighttime reading, or reading before you go on a trip, or just ones that you can use in your kitchen for everyday cooking. So by tying food with culture, she was showing women that the subject they knew intimately could lead to expertise and interesting, intelligent conversation that was even on par with their husbands. And here you can see her kind of experiencing culture and food side by side at a dinner in Haiti, and then her and Walter on a trip dressed in traditional costume. Lastly, Cannon offered an escape from monotony by appealing to the creative impulses of women. She showed women how to elevate their meals with a creative touch of pizzazz. No longer plagued by kitchen-made chores, which have been taken over by the food manufacturer, she soon becomes an artist at her stove, adept in the realms of cookless cookery, where a dash of herbs, a splash of wine, and an unusual garnish may lift the ready soup. She told her House Beautiful readers, in many ways, making a menu is like writing a sonnet. We may laugh at this or not take it that seriously, but compared with previous domestic advice writers who were seeing food only in terms of nutrition, not as a total meal experience, her creative touch in showing women where they can use these plain, standard ingredients and lift them into something resembling art really stuck out to her readers. Finally, I'm just going to conclude. These are the two recipes of hers that I made to bring today. And I want to share with you what she wrote about the quick, cheesy bread. And kind of give you an idea of her personality as well. If Merlin himself set about to conjure up a miraculous loaf in minutes, he could hardly equal the success that you will have with a couple of cans of refrigerated biscuits. This recipe makes 2 loaves. And the bread basically is just refrigerated biscuits stuck together, sprinkled with cheese on top, and added with little chopped chives and parsley, cooked in the oven. This rounds out a salad meal, livens up tea time, and provides a hearty hot bread for company or family meals. So, obviously she had high praise for her own shortcut recipes, but I think the bread turned out pretty well, and it's really not that gross. So, in her book, the only real book about Poppy Cannon, Laura Shapiro wrote, "Like the 50s themselves, Poppy Cannon left the wrong legacy." But really, I've come to question this. Can we dismiss Poppy Cannon? Can we dismiss the legacy of the 1950s that easily? I really don't think so. Thinking about the legacy that she left, she told women that they can do more than simply get by with using canned foods at mealtime. That they could have this touch of the high class, yet it didn't have to be an all or nothing deal. They didn't have to live at home and slave over a hot stove day in and day out, but they could be involved in their world. They could have jobs and careers and enjoy the life of cooking. And by combining modern technology, ready-made foods, with an idea of gourmet living, she kind of paved the way for things to come as far as Julia Child and also Betty Friedan as far as critiquing what was wrong in the house. She can't be lumped together with other dime a dozen ladies magazine writers, because I think that she truly was special, and you can see all the things that she was involved with, not only in cooking, but in writing and traveling and her diplomatic work and her political work. So I think that indeed Poppy Cannon is the 1950s in its many facets, bundled up in one energetic, optimistic, and savvy individual. Thank you.